on this side of the House, we can affirm clearly that we will stand with Ukraine with everything necessary for as long as necessary. As we saw last week, no Conservative politician can say the same in this House.
He is so desperate to talk about anything else that he avoids talking about what's happening in our own country. So will he answer the question? Will he take his tax off our farmers so our people can afford to eat?
The Prime Minister there and the official opposition leader sparring in the House of Commons this afternoon over the Conservatives' move to reject a Ukraine-Canada free trade deal because they claim it imposes a carbon tax on Ukraine. Ukraine's embassy in Canada has said that isn't true. The back and forth didn't end there, though. House of Commons Trade Committee started its study this morning of the legislation, and the Tories failed in that study in their effort to delay it from coming into force, or the deal from coming into force, until references to carbon pricing are removed. The front bench is back to talk about that. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. Rob, I'll start with you. We have convened on multiple instances to talk about the success of the Tories' political strategy over the last number of months. Do you think this one is a misfire?
Yes, it's a total misfire. And you know what, Vassy? If the Tories somehow lose the next election, we're going to point to moments like this and saying these guys can't get out of their own way. And the Liberals, I don't know if the Liberals inserted the language to trap them, but I'm sorry, but in Canada, if you don't side with Ukraine and the Ukrainian government is saying that it is not the way that Mr. Poilievre's party is claiming it is, then they've got a problem. I'm astounded that they've let this issue become a dominant thing. They're always on high ground and on safe ground when they're talking about affordability. And I think power to Mr. Poilievre for talking about farmers being concerned about the fuel costs and other things. However, on this one, I think they look out to lunch and tone deaf. And I'm astounded that this is now, I think this is like more than a week that we've been talking about this. How did they fall into this trap?
Yeah, it keeps going on because the committee, as I was mentioning in the introduction, met today to study it, and they tried to move that there be an amendment that removes that language, and that was defeated. Lisa, do you think this is a strategic mistake on the Conservatives' part?
No, I don't. I fundamentally disagree with Benzie on that one. I think you are seeing very clearly what Mr. Poilievre and the Conservative Party believe with respect to a carbon tax, that they don't want one domestically, and they're certainly not going to agree to a trade agreement that seems to influence whether or not Ukraine has a carbon tax in their country in order to do trade with Canada. Anything that's going to set up Canada's future policy with respect to a carbon tax, they're going to oppose. Now, what I take great umbrage with is the Prime Minister, our master of wedge politics, deciding that this was something that he was going to try to wedge on. And to tell me that James Bazan or Senator Denise Batters are not there for the best interests of Ukraine is absolutely laughable and shameful, quite frankly. So make the hay, do the politics. There's no surprise for me that the Conservatives are taking this position. But what I find very disappointing, once again, is the Prime Minister finding something that is extremely emotional, incredibly important to our country, and just wedging on it.
I think what's informing the politics on it is sort of the discrepancy, I guess you could say, about opinion around, Tom, what's informing the Conservatives' position, right? Is it, as Lisa points out, and as they insist, around this ideological total opposition to the carbon tax in any form, domestic or otherwise? Or is it appeasing, a sentiment that exists on the far right in the United States, which is lessening support for Ukraine? That is the sort of what the Liberals have been accusing the Tories of.
I think it's the latter, and I do see similarities between the positions that the Conservatives are taking here. And sometimes when someone goes as white hot as Andrew Scheer has done on this, and as hot as Pierre Poilievre has been on this, it's because they know that they haven't made the right strategic choice. Look, there's a reason, in my view, why the Ukrainian embassy in Ottawa said there's nothing in here that requires a carbon tax. It's because there's nothing in that deal that requires a carbon tax. Ukraine is trying to position itself to join Europe. They will have obligations under European rules with regard to carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. Every single international trade deal for the past 30 years, going back to the original Canada-US Free Trade Agreement, prior to the NAFTA, we've had deals on environment. It's been part of the background. At the time, it was the Americans wanting to make sure that businesses didn't locate in Mexico where they considered that they had very few rules. So that was built up. Capacity building was part of it. This is part and parcel of international trade right now. Everybody understands environmental rules. That's what this is about. The Conservatives are looking a little bit silly, pointing to this thing as if it was, a snake in a bag. There's got to be something horrible in there. We've got to vote against this thing. And I don't think that it works to try to argue that there's this or that member of the Conservative caucus who happens to be close to the Ukrainian community. There are 1.5 million Canadians with some Ukrainian heritage who are looking at this and saying, we need all the help that we can get right now. Canada has been providing it. Chrystia Freeland's been front and center. Trudeau's trying to help. And somehow there's a party in Canada doing the same sort of thing that the Republicans are doing in the United States. And I think it looks very bad for Canada as official opposition Conservative Party to have thrown their lot in on a misinterpretation of the intention and ascribing nefarious motives to the Liberals. I think it's not working, and I do think they look foolish.
I just want to, Lisa, I saw you shaking your head. I'm going to get your response in a second. I just want to make sure I get Brian in first. Where do you fall on that?
Now everybody just wants to hear from Lisa. Everybody's keen to hear her thoughts.
I'll get right back to you in 1 second. I just want to make sure we get everyone in.
So look, I think the trade deal should have passed and should pass unanimously. It would send a nice message. That said, is it completely ridiculous for a party to say, look, we support the idea of what you're trying to do, but we don't like this stipulation, so we're going to vote against a certain bill? That's a normal thing that happens from time to time. But you can then also say the other thing and say, could you not agree with 99% of the bill and say, we'll vote for it, but make clear to everybody, just so you know, we don't like this. But we're going to vote because we recognize that it's a strong symbol for us to all sort of be on the same page. So both those arguments are kind of fair. What I find unfortunate is that's not what's happening here. And you alluded to this in your preamble to Tom. I think what's happening is the Conservatives and Poilievre have made a calculation to say this carbon pricing stuff is so good for us that we're going to take every opportunity, and here's another opportunity, that little stipulation, we're going to jump on it, make it clear that we're the party that's going to get rid of, so-called carbon tax. So this is domestically a good opportunity for us. Meanwhile, the Liberals and Trudeau are saying to themselves, this is an opportunity for us to try to paint Poilievre as a right-wing kind of Republican light, maybe Republican alike person here in Canada. This is our opportunity, so Trudeau gets very emotional about it to make sure it makes the headline, so people can sort of, in their opinion, start to see him as a right-wing politician. So that's what's really at play, is these political posturing for what is an important issue. And I find that just unfortunate because it is such, look, I get that it'll happen from time to time on topics, but does it really have to happen on this one? Yeah,
is this the one? And I think Brian's point is a fair one. Lisa, I'll give you a response here, that everybody is playing to a domestic audience.
I think Brian Glenn's exactly correct. That's a great analysis, and I agree with it. Why I was shaking my head vehemently when my good friend Tal Mulcair was talking was because I just don't accept this notion that they're taking a page from MAGA politics down in the United States and the Republican Party and this kind of anti-Ukraine thing. That is just crap, guys. That is not true, and shame on anyone who continues to repeat that.
I guess, though, and Tom, maybe you want to respond to that. I think, the opening is there because of what's happening in the United States. And whether it's true or not, you'd think that the Conservatives would be aware of the fact strategically that it will be invoked given what's happening in the U.S.
Well, precisely because I also agree with the point that Brian was making. It would be the easiest thing in the world for the Conservatives to say, we're, of course, standing with Ukraine, and we will vote for this because Ukraine wants it, and it'll be helpful to them. But instead, they're finding any way that they can to send in people like Scheer to go white hot on this thing, to say how terrible it is because there's a carbon tax in there. And the Ukrainian embassy is saying, no, there is not. I'm with them. And I do know that this is a page from American politics where you're trying to set these things across. The Americans are not supportive of Ukraine on the Republican side, and it's something that we are starting to see on the Conservative side. They can moan and whine and complain all they want. People will know when the Conservatives vote against this thing, whether or not they stood with Ukraine. That's it.
And they are contending otherwise, but I take your point. I have to leave it there. The only thing you can all agree on is that Brian Glant was right. So
he was.
Thanks, everyone.
I'm calling you Mulcair after this.